The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Giants baseball, past, present, and future. Michael Duca's the man. He's here. No introduction needed. How are you, sir?
Couldn't be better, Ralph. I've tried.
Okay. It's like somebody asked me the other day, how you feeling? I said, we're really great. Well, never mind. That was just more silly than the radio needs to hear. So tell me, Michael, are you feeling good with the Giants? Bad with the Giants? How's it going?
Well, I'm probably feeling better than Brandon Belt right now.
Whoa. Yeah. These things happen. Why don't you explain why you're feeling better?
I have not gotten an update as of this morning. I just know that he was taken to the hospital last night, and they believe that he was suffering an episode of appendicitis. The outcome of that is still kind of open and can be very, I don't know how to say it, I guess very, very disparate. If they caught it early, they can remove the appendix through laparoscopy, which is what happened to Rich Aurelia a number of years ago, I think 2000. And he was out for a few days. But if the appendix is so badly inflamed that they're concerned that it will burst, then they have to actually open up the abdominal cavity to go get it to make sure that it doesn't burst and to make sure that if it does, they get everything cleaned out.
And that's 3 weeks minimum.
Yeah. So either way, it's it's just kind of the next thing in a season that has been more general baseball.
Yeah.
Giants of
much like my Mets. Every day you
your Mets.
What's happening? It's crazy. But with the Mets, it's been like 3 years in a row of these unbelievable injuries, and I'm starting to think that a player can be what's known as injury prone. I never used to understand that one, but I see people like Cespedes and with repeated hamstring injuries. I don't think there's a cure for it, to be honest with you. I think that's an injury that will never go away, hammy.
Well, it's possible, but it's also possible that it may go the other way. I just heard a very interesting piece, I believe it was on NPR, about companies here in the Bay Area that are doing really interesting biomechanical research where they've been able to develop software algorithms that can analyze, they can actually just watch you walk and watch you run and tell you what's going to get hurt. And also tell you how to alter the way you walk or run so that it doesn't get hurt.
Wow. That would be nice. But I'm using Cespedes as an example because he took the initiative to go on a yoga-trained exercise program over the off-season and to really put some time into it. He'd been getting a lot of heat in the New York press. He played a lot of golf and this, that, and the other thing as someone who might be a malingerer and is just playing out the contract, that type of thing. So he took it upon himself to really redevelop his off-season workout program, and he still gets hurt 2 or 3 times since the start of the season. So, maybe this new program going on, is it in the infant stages of research?
My understanding is that they are beginning to work with some sports teams. I don't know whether it's college or professional at this point. I kind of walked in the middle of the piece.
Okay. Tell you what I like about the Giants, just off the top of my head, Longoria is really coming around.
And that was to be expected. A lot of people have been very critical of his defense, saying, gee, he won a Gold Glove on last year, accepted it on opening weekend, and then promptly put it on and used it to field for the rest of the year. Not true. You have to remember that this is a guy with 9 years playing on turf at home and playing on turf in a couple of places on the road even for a while. That's resolved down to, I think Tampa is the only field left that has turf now, but early in his career he played on turf, and you get different hops on turf, and you have to learn an infield, you have to learn how the dirt plays and how the grass plays, and you're playing a lot of games in the National League parks now and a few in the American League parks, which is the reverse of what he was doing. So there is an adjustment period, whether people like it or not. No matter how good a defender you are, there's an adjustment period. And I think that once the defense began to settle down, that he relaxed and the offense followed.
Right. People don't talk about adjustment. They say, well, it's an adjustment physically, different parts, this, that, and the other thing. How about the adjustment to taking your kids out of a school, taking your wife out of a community that she's comfortable in, the adjustment to a new state, literally, to live in, new climate, new everything is different in the man's life. New teammates, new friends, new acquaintances. It's got to be difficult from that standpoint. Players get very little credit, or whatever the word should be. It's change, major change in your life when you go from one team to another. In this case, it wasn't a free agent thing. He was traded. He may have enjoyed the idea of coming to the Giants and what have you, but he really wasn't given a choice, and that's something that we lose sight of when we say, well, this guy's having a bit of an off year, or this, that, and the other thing. It's tough being a ball player.
Yeah, there's a major adjustment if you change jobs from Microsoft to Google. And now imagine if Microsoft traded you to Google.
Right.
Yeah, you show up one morning and your desk is all packed up in a box, and somebody hands you the box and says, you don't work here in Washington anymore. You work down in Silicon Valley now. It is a major adjustment, and it's less of an adjustment for Longoria because he's a native Californian. He's a Southern Californian, but he's a native Californian. So he's used to the coast, he's used to the area, and he's probably somewhat used to the climate. But you're right. If you've played for 9 or 10 years in Tampa Bay, your wardrobe probably is completely inappropriate for San Francisco Bay. Right.
No question about that. Even the color of your clothing. You gotta breathe. You gotta breathe the team you're on. If you're on 5 years, you're just used to the uniform. You're used to the same way to work every day. Same guys greet you at the gate. All kinds of things that make it psychologically different to adjust. So I give credit to those who do it easily.
And probably most important of all is you're dealing with a different culture. The culture in Tampa Bay is very avant-garde, if you will. Those guys have a stated, avowed purpose of disrupting baseball. their strict adherence to metrics, their use of shifts on defense on almost every hitter, their, what some people think of as craziness in having, starting pitchers and now opening pitchers, relievers who come in and throw an inning or two to face the top of a lineup that may be, all right-handed, and they want to start a lefty, so they want to start him out where he gets a full inning under his belt before he has to face the tough hitters. It's all very radical and very different. You come to San Francisco where they still do metrics and they still have numbers, but the culture is very much one of, can you pass the eye test? And, he went from Kevin Cash, who's the youngest manager in the major leagues, to Bruce Bochy, who was one of the oldest and the one with the most wins of any active manager. It's a very different world that he stepped into, and it takes a little while to find your legs, to figure out who your friends are in the clubhouse and who your good friends are in the clubhouse and who you can confide in the clubhouse.
You're right. Because, everybody says, well, we're a team, this, that, and the other thing. There's no team that isn't 25 guys that may not mesh on every level. Even if they're winning, even if they're successful, even if they're long-term teammates, there are times people just don't get along. And
it's as simple as this. If the Latin guys are telling a funny story in Spanish, the non-Spanish speakers can see the animation and the joy, and they can see the laughter, but all they feel is the exclusion.
Good point. Good point. And the same holds true
the other way.
The other way,
sure.
Exactly. And that's a different culture. Dominicans all come to this country, and they've got their own, not just Dominicans, Venezuelans, Puerto Ricans, what have you. They've got their own sense of problems, which is magnified by the language that they're learning, the mores, the culture, the interaction with women. All of it is very, very difficult, and those players don't get enough credit.
There's a phrase that we've used a lot in the last 10 or 15 years to describe certain restaurants, and the phrase is comfort food. And what you have to realize is that Caribbeans have a lot of trouble finding comfort food in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I did an interview with, I don't know if you remember him, Felix Millan, who was a second baseman who came from the Braves.
Felix Millan, who holds one of the most ignominious records in baseball history. He hit into 4 double plays in one game.
Whoa. I thought that would be a Joe Torre record.
I think it was Joe Torre on base ahead of him in most of them.
It wouldn't surprise me. Anyway, he was just simply talking about what. I said, was it a shock to you when you were traded from Milwaukee to the Mets? He goes, oh, no, it was like coming home. He says, everywhere I went in New York, people were always feeding me home food with the beans or whatever he was used to. And he didn't get that in Milwaukee in the Midwest. So I'm thinking he's not the only Latin that has had a lot of trouble playing in Middle America.
Yeah, that has changed a lot. I don't want to get into politics here, but there's been the wave of immigration that's happened in the last 10 years has actually pushed mostly into the Plain States and the Midwest. And it's a lot of people who are working in one form or another of agriculture, meatpacking, or dairy industries. The Wisconsin dairy industry in particular would probably have to shut down. The farmers themselves say they'd have to shut down without the workers they have from Mexico. So I would suspect that there is at least an easier time of it now But you still, think about it. As cosmopolitan a city as San Francisco is, I'm not aware of a Cuban restaurant in the city of San Francisco. There may be one.
Right.
And as Orlando Cepeda told me, Cuban food is great and I love it, but it's not Puerto Rican food.
Right. Right. Well, Michael, I don't know if you know, downtown Alameda has a Cuban restaurant.
That's right, they do, and it's been there for a number of years now. And I know there's a very, very good one in San Jose on Ray Street. But that's not a very broad.
Yeah, few and far between.
And if you're in a hotel off Union Square, you are probably not going to find a restaurant in Alameda, let alone get there.
Right. Exactly. So, as an official scorer, now I would change the subject a little bit. You go through a schedule over the course of a year. Is there a time, like players, where you're looking for a second wind?
Not so much. I mean, what tends to happen, what I have found both in scoring games and in doing games for MLB.com is that games either have a rhythm or they don't. And if you get yourself into a game that doesn't have a rhythm, you'd best pay very careful attention. Woe betide you, because you're going to see sloppiness on the field, and you're going to see guys doing things akin to what J.R. Smith did in the basketball game this week. There's going to be mental lapses, there's going to be screw-ups on the field, and as a scorer, you have to be acutely aware of the difference between a physical misplay and a mental error, one of which you charge and one of which you don't. And there are games where, you sit and you can see a play in the first inning and you immediately know in your mind, oh, this is going to be one of those games.
Okay.
And it's interesting because the choppier the game is, the harder it is to call. When there's no rhythm in the game, there's no rhythm to your watching the game either. And I know that probably sounds very esoteric and maybe a little crazy to people, but when you're 4,000 plus games into your baseball watching career at the major league level, it's just so. It's just something you see. You occasionally hear broadcasters talk, particularly in basketball and hockey, games that have constant motion. You hear them talk about the game not having a rhythm or being choppy. But that happens in baseball too.
Now, is it tiring after a game like that, scoring a game like that? Is it physically tiring for you?
It's mentally tiring. What happened, and it isn't that it's tiring, Ralph. What's really interesting, I'll do a game, and as you know, my wife is the manager of guest services for the Giants. So if I work a game there, I'm still at the ballpark an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes after the final pitch. And then we get in the car and we drive home. If it's a day game, we drive home through an hour and a half of traffic. And if it's a night game, we hope they're not doing any construction on the Bay Bridge. And yet, by the time I get home, 2.5, almost 3 hours sometimes after the last pitch, I'm still keyed up. I can't just lay down and go to sleep. It takes me probably another 40 minutes to wind my mind down. I will go over plays.
Do you ever second guess yourself?
All the time. All the time. This is one of the things that is most interesting to me as an individual. I see other scorers, and I see how decisive they are, and I wonder am I the only guy that really sits here and second guesses himself on plays? No, all the time. I had a play a couple of weeks ago in a game. Daniel Mengen was pitching, and the final score of the game was 1-0, and he was the losing pitcher. Pitched a great game. Runner on third with one out. The A's drew the infield all the way in onto the grass. The batter hit a one-hopper to shortstop. The shortstop shifted his feet so that it was crystal clear he was coming home. He would have had to throw across his body to go to first.
Right.
He shifted his feet. The contact play was on. The runner was on his way home. He gets the ball in his glove. It's a short hop, and it's hit pretty hard. He gets the ball in his glove, and as he's bringing his glove up to make the exchange, the ball falls out, and the run scores. I initially scored that as a fielder's choice, an E6, and no RBI, because it was fairly clear to me that if he completes the play that he had already made the beginning of, the runner's going to be out by 10 feet. But there was no small amount of angst from the team that was deprived of an RBI. And so what I did was, as soon as I got home, I left a voicemail with the Elias Sports Bureau. They are our go-to and our backup on all things regarding the rules. And I asked them, is this play scored correctly or not? And their answer was one of those Elias answers that you get sometimes when you're a scorer. They said, you are completely within your rights to score the play the way you did. However, we showed it to 6 people here, and all 6 of them said you should give an RBI on the play. And the reason that they gave, and here's one of the things that will help people understand how scorers have to think. Because the shortstop never made a throw on the play. He threw to first after the bobble. He realized that he was not going to get the runner at the plate, so he threw to first and short hopped the first baseman, and the runner was safe. The first baseman had come off the bag. That was not his original play, but it was the play that he wound up being stuck with. And because of that, you can't call it a fielder's choice. And because you can't call it a fielder's choice, because he never made a throw to the plate, which may have been wide, may have been dropped, may have been a whole bunch of things that allowed the run to score, but it would have allowed you to calculate the timing of the play and see whether the runner should have been out or not. Because no play was made on the runner, you really can't assume that he would have been out. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the reasonable thing to do is to only score the play that you saw, and the play that you saw was the throw to first, which conceded the run. And if the run is conceded, then there's an RBI. And if there's an RBI, and here's the thing, I mean, it was actually people from the A's broadcasters who came to me and said, you really should give an RBI on that play. And I don't think they were thinking about the law of unintended consequences, because as soon as you award an RBI on the play, the run goes from unearned to earned automatically. It's not a judgment.
Oh, yeah. So they were just looking at it from standpoint of, this would be fair.
Well,
but
they were looking at it the right way. They were looking at it from an equity point of view and not from a homer point of view. Right.
Exactly, and all of a sudden, I'm sure they were surprised by the fact that if you change that, the ERA goes up.
They were surprised by that, and in fact, there were people with the A's who said, "Well, you can probably expect that play to be appealed now." And I said, "Well, I probably expected it to be appealed either way."
Right.
It was. If I didn't award the RBI, that would have been appealed. As it turns out, neither the pitcher nor anyone who represents him chose to appeal the play. So I guess in the end, with help from Elias, we got it right. But that's the kind of thing that happens more frequently than you realize. There are times that you get second guessed. I mean, I had a play a number of years ago that was unique in the annals of baseball history. Benji Molina hit a fly ball that on the field was ruled to have scraped the front of the wall in right field at AT&T, and he wound up on first base with a single, and it was in September, and Bruce Bochy had two pinch runners locked and loaded on the dugout steps. One of them was to go in if Molina hit a single, and one of them was to go in if Molina hit a double. And he hit a single, and the pinch runner, who was Emmanuel Burris, came sprinting out of the dugout and ran down to first base and stood on the bag and told Benji, "I'm running for you." Okay, so they're both on the bag. Meanwhile, the smartest baseball player I ever was around, Omar Vizquel, turned to Boch and said, "I heard that ball hit metal. Makes a different sound off metal than it does off bricks. In a full stadium, I heard that ball hit metal. Go ask to look at the ball." They look at the ball, and sure enough, there's a smudge of green paint on it. The only way you can get green paint on a baseball that's hit in fair territory is for it to hit that metal roof in right field, which is a home run. So the umpires went in. This is a time when basically all they were reviewing was home runs. They went in, reviewed it, came back and said, "It's a home run." Well, now Bochy goes out and he says, "All right, I want Benji to circle the bases. I'm leaving him in the game." And the umpire allegedly tells Bruce, "Well, Bruce, you got a choice here. You can have Burris circle the bases and get the run, or you can leave Benji in the game, but he's out because you had two runners on first base at the same time."
Well, and
now wait. So
that's a weird one because it's the ump's call or the lack of call for a home run that put this thing in motion. So that
well, it is, but it was the over-eagerness of the player to come out onto the field and announce himself as a substitute before the play was fully resolved. So here's the issue that this creates. Bochy decides he's going to leave Burris in. He circles the bases, and he now scores. He also protests the game. The protest is dropped when they win the game. But here's my problem. Benji Molina has hit a home run, but Benji Molina didn't score. Emmanuel Burris scored.
Wow.
Which leads to the musical question: if Benji Molina hit a home run but did not score the run, did he drive himself in? Does he get an RBI for driving himself in if he's not in the game when the run scores?
Well, doesn't he get... Oh, that's right. That's right.
So I called Elias and asked about that, and they said, "Oh, we got to get people out of bed for this. This has never happened." It literally took them 90 minutes to get an answer back to me.
What was the answer, just out of curiosity?
Well, the answer was the logical one that I would have applied in the absence of any help from them, which is you have to account for everything that happens on the field. A run was driven in. A run was driven in by a man who swung the bat. Therefore, he gets credit for driving in the run regardless of when it scores or who scores it. So, yes, you have the
not
you have
in
the crazy...
game, like you said, if he's out of the game when the
that
run
turns out to
scored.
be, you have to account for what happened. And what happened was he hit a home run and 2 runs scored. You have to account for that.
Right.
And if the runs scored, they're either driven in or they're not driven in, and the only way they're not driven in is if they score on a double play or an error or a wild pitch.
Okay.
None of those things occurred, therefore the run was driven in. So Burris gets credit for the run scored, and Benji has the strangest line in history. He has a home run and an RBI and no runs scored. I have that official scorer's sheet framed in my office.
Wow.
Because it also made me the answer to an all-time trivia question, which is who is the only official scorer in the history of baseball to have the first home run overturned by video replay, or home run created by video replay overturn in 2 parks. Because strictly by the luck of the draw, I also got the first one in Oakland.
Wow. Well, I remember that year they were just doing home runs, nothing else.
Mm-hmm. They were also doing fair foul calls. They were basically they were boundary calls. The boundaries of the field were what they were looking at. So a home run has it left the boundary of the field, and a fair foul call has it crossed the boundary of the field.
Yeah. Michael, are you surprised by how many reversals there are? Umpire calls reversed.
No, nor do I think it's a problem. We're getting into an area where I can get into trouble expressing opinions here. But I will just say that both umpires and official scorers are appealed and overturned at nominally the same rate, and that nominally they're shown to be correct on about 2/3 of the close calls. And if you've got a call close enough for somebody to dispute, and you're still right 2 times out of 3, you're probably doing a decent job.
Yeah. Just that when we were kids, we would always hear that the umpires are right 98, and this is just a figure that was used. 98% of the time, the umpires are right.
Well, and within that 2%, my guess would be that the vast majority of that 2% is going to be on ball strike calls.
Okay.
You look at safe out calls. I mean, for me, if you look at, I would guess, I don't have the figures on this, and this is just me as a fan watching the game and kind of reacting to what I see. My guess is that a not inconsequential percentage of the overturns of umpire calls, I would guess maybe 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4 of the overturns are coming on these plays where a runner overslides the base or gets back to first base on a pickoff play and goes from having his hand on the bag shifting to his foot and is not in contact with the bag for, 2 frames on a 30 frame per second video. And something that an umpire is never going to be able to see in real time. But if you break it down and split it down to individual frames, well, yeah, the ball was in contact with him and he was off the bag for a 15th of a second.
Right. Or
and those are now being turned.
Got into it and then came off the bag. That's another call that's.
Yeah. Well, that's the other one that I'm talking about. That basically, you go in with a hook slide, and by its very nature, you're trying to elude a tag, and there may come and so now you've got this thing of not people just swiping a tag down and then looking for an answer. They're bending over and almost, sitting on the runner and just dropping the ball
waiting
on
for
him
him
and
to
holding
come
it
off,
there for
right?
3 or 4 or 5 or 8 or 9 seconds, and you also got the issue of it's hard for a runner to call for time when a play is over if it's his hand on the bag.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's also the issue of guys sliding in head first, not only to first, which is craziness to me, unless you're eluding a tag, because it's been proven that it slows you down, but these guys slide into bases because they can't keep their legs on the base, but the injuries that are wrists to fingers and hands and what have you, I don't know if that's worth it. You rarely see, you speak of a hook slide, you rarely see guys sliding in feet first anymore.
Well, you see it in some instances and not in others. It varies by teams. You see these guys wearing the lobster claws or the oven mitts to try and protect their hands now. You see some guys who will hold their batting gloves in their hand to make a fist so that they don't extend their fingers out and jam them. It's a dangerous play no matter how you do it, but if you go in head first, your hands are going to come up off the ground so that you can reach the bag, and also because you don't want to be scraping your hands on the pebbles out there. But the other thing that a lot of runners just don't think about the physics of is your feet, if you're bouncing along on your toes, are going to take your legs up off the ground. And there might be a moment as you're sliding further into the bag where your feet cause your knee to come up off that pillow just long enough for a tag that was way too late to all of a sudden be a tag that retires you.
Yeah. Now, you use the expression pillow and sack. It's not a pillow and a sack anymore. They've changed the base itself to the point where it is hard and not giving. And I think that must have had an effect on the way guys slide in and the way the game is today.
I think it also has had a beneficial effect on turning the double play. I think that, having something solid to push off against has allowed the guy in the middle to be able to be more sure-footed around the base and to be able to get out of the way easier because he is more sure-footed.
Okay, that brings me to another question, Mr. Official Scorer. The assumed double play. You cannot assume that it's going to be a double play no matter what. But
no, that's not true.
Tell me this.
That's not true.
Tell me this. You cannot assume a double play except if a good throw is made to a first baseman that clearly beats the batter runner and the first baseman drops the ball or otherwise fails to handle a non-errant throw. In that case, you can assume the double play because the first baseman has committed a dropped throw error. Okay, now how about there's a real slow runner on. Clint Courtney's on first base, and he's going to ramble down to second in like 12.5 seconds. And a slow batter hits a ground ball to second, and second baseman fields it and simply drops it. He's got about 5 minutes, it seems, to turn that you can't. I mean, the rule is so inflexible that even if it's so obvious that it would have been a double play, you can't assume it. Is it?
Well, there's nothing obvious about it being a double play until the ball is at first base before the runner.
Okay. Yeah.
Because he could have fielded that ball cleanly and made a good throw to the shortstop who could have dropped it. He could have dropped it making the exchange, which is not an error. He records an out.
Good point. So even if the double play was imminent, got to call it off.
It can be 99% likely, but that still does not mean that you can assume it.
Now, may I ask, was the rule always that way?
The rule has always been that way in the time that I have known the rule.
Okay. It's not something that was changed in our lifetime, as it were.
Well, in our adult lifetime, anyway.
Yes. Hey, as usual, I learned something. That's a conversation with Michael Duca. It's an automatic. I got to learn. And I thank you. This was a great episode.
Pleasure was mine. Glad to be able to do it. Look forward to coming back soon.
We will do it approximately a week from now. How about that?
Sounds like a plan.
Thank you, sir. Stay healthy in the meantime. Keep the Giants banner going. Remember, they're still the New York Giants to me. I mean, sometimes I think about it and I shake my head. Wanted to say one other thing in relation to Longoria. Arroyo, the guy that they gave for him, is doing well. Duffy is back healthy and doing well. I'm the
Duffy's
kind of guy.
Doing great.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's really nice to see. You give up a play. I want Longoria to do well, but I don't want these guys to not do well simply because they were traded.
No, you basically want both sides of a trade to be beneficial because that establishes a trading partner relationship. It's just, think of it this way. If you get the better of a guy on a trade, it's just like imposing tariffs.
Right. There won't be a next one. Let's put it that way.
The next one will be a lot harder to accomplish.
Yeah. So, best of luck to those two guys. That's working out nice. It works out good for baseball, and it keeps the balance going. Harkening back to when the Giants were losing outfielders like Felipe Alou and Willie Kirkland and Daddy Wags. I mean, they were supplying the National League with talent. I always rooted for those guys to do well for some reason when they left the Giants. Just instinctively. Tom Haller was a good example. Even though he went over to the Dodgers, I didn't want him to do poorly. Anyway, that's it for me. I've babbled at you, but I've learned from you, and I'm appreciative, Michael. Thank you for doing this.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll throw one more thing in there while I'm going. If you like our offerings on the network, this show, any of the shows, please be so kind. Box up some gently used children's books and take them to the Head Start program. Kids need to read, they need to learn, they need to be school ready, they need to get their noses out of the devices and the computers, and they need to develop an imagination that only reading can provide. So
let me jump in on this. Let me jump in on this and also suggest to people that if you don't have some gently used children's books because you're Ralph's age or you're my age and the kids are long gone, that bookstores have these remarkable things called remainder tables. And you can sometimes buy books for 10 cents on the dollar, brand new ones. And half-price books starts out with books at half price and occasionally puts them on sale for 25 cents on the dollar. There's no shame in giving kids new books to read.
Good points. Very, very, very good points. Thank you, Michael.
See you soon.
We'll be back next week. You keep on teaching. That's what you do. Even in closing, you teach. Teach, teach, teach. Be well. Thank you again, everybody.